start the meeting by saying the opening prayer. We could all stand. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision-making, protect us and the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen. I'd also like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. You may be seated. I inform you this council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. Albury City accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations. I've received 2 conflict of interest declarations, one from Councillor King, and the interest is pecuniary, significant, and the brief description is he may have professional relationships with either tender if either were successful. The item number is 13.2, Thaguna Elizabeth Mitchell Drive intersection, and the action is to leave the chamber. The second conflict is Frank Zachnich, pecuniary. Is it less or significant? Just pecuniary. CEO performance plan, ordinary council meeting, agenda number 17.1, CEO performance plan 2020, and the action is leave the chamber when the item is discussed. Thank you. Mr Zachnich.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. This advice relates to the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act and disclosure of political donations. The Act requires under section 10.4 that a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of the council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on the council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Accordingly, the provisions of section 4.151 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report, detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the council. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of the council under the Environmental Planning Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, development control plan or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 9.3 of Part 9 of that Act. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Zachnich. Thank you, Councillor Sam, for the apologies. Mover, please, and seconder. Councillor Stutchbury.
Welcome, everyone, to Albury City Council 2020. I move that we accept the apology of Councillor Graham Doxey. Am I doing the right thing?
Yeah, and grant him a leave of absence.
And grant him a leave of absence for the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second.
Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against the motion is carried. And we just might take this moment now to have a brief interlude and just while Graham Turner is coming down to the floor, Walker. Oh, I've got Turner on the mind tonight. Graham Walker. Come on, Graham. Well done, Graham. Now, Graham was on Australia Day awarded the Citizen of the Year Award for his work with Lamington Lions, and certainly his untiring effort over the last 31 years to work in the community under great duress, and certainly his heart is vested in the community, and his wife Pam they've worked tirelessly running businesses and certainly working on farms and other areas. And Graham still has an interest in the Walker's sawmill in Corryong, which is very dear to his heart. But more importantly, Graham has worked with Lavington Lions for the last 31 years as the treasurer and in various offices with Lavington Lions. And he was suitably awarded this award on Australia Day. Unfortunately, couldn't be there because he'd booked in to go to the tennis. Was the tennis good, Graham?
Certainly was.
So, no one held that against you. But on top of that, Graham has been a board member of Avon, which is a respite facility in Melbourne that he's paid particular attention to our community and given a lot to his state and the country community. And I think, again, Graham, I think the award was richly rewarded and certainly justified. So, Graham, this is our opportunity to say thanks to you and Pam certainly for your tireless support of Graham, because behind every great man there is a greater woman, and certainly you have been that rock for Graham for a long time, a lot of years, since around 1986, wasn't it, Graham? 88, when Graham contracted a very rare condition, and certainly she's been by your side. And every kudos that you receive, she receives as well. And Pam, could you just come up for a moment, if that's possible? No? You want to stay there? And Charlie's, every Citizen of the Year gets a bodyguard, and Charlie's Graham's bodyguard tonight. But Pam, thank you for your support of Graham and certainly both of your efforts in our communities and certainly the work you've done, tirelessly supporting Lavington and Albury and all the regional communities that you've lived in, because essentially it's not just one community, it's a whole community. So you and Graham have done a wonderful job, and both of your names probably should be on that certificate. So Graham, I believe you want to say a few words, so I'm happy to hold the mic for you if you like.
Should be right.
You're right.
I'd just like to acknowledge the Albury City Council for presenting me with this award. I'm very honoured, but also very humbled. I think that there's a reason in life that you give back to your community when you can. And when I had the disability I've got, I didn't think that I'd be able to serve in Lions. But I've been treasurer for 5 years, and I've also run the vinyl call for a number of years before that. So it just shows that a person with a disability, if they've got support and you can use your brain, that these things can come to the fruition. And I'd just like to thank once again Kevin and your crew for awarding this very, I'm very humbled by it anyway. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. And again, I'd just like to pass on our congratulations and our warm condolences for the support and the effort you put in every day to do what you do, as well as do more for the community. You and Pam are certainly a great example of what can be done if you want to believe in yourself and believe in your community. So really thank you again, Graham, and thank you, Pam, for your efforts and your labour, and certainly our community is a better place for you two being in it. So thanks again, and thanks for coming in and sharing this moment with us, Graham. Thanks again, mate. Okay, welcome back to business as usual, and we're up to the Merrill Minute. We do not have one. CM6 action plans. Thanks, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the following action plans be received and noted. 1, actions complete for noting only. 2, actions awaiting response from external parties. 3, actions in progress. And 4, long-term issues more than 3 months.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, you have a number of people with questions. You're happy for me to take questions before
Thank
you
you,
open
Mr
debate?
Mayor. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor King. Question?
Yeah, question regarding CM 11.3, the traffic pedestrian crossing in Swift Street. I'm just reading here that the design is to remove 6 parking spaces. To the relevant member of staff, can they remind me of what, when the refuge was put up, how many parking spaces were going to be removed?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, 7 was the initial with the refuge, so we've reduced that by 1. We've also proposed to reduce the time limit of parking there from 2 hours to 1 hour to potentially provide more access to that area.
Further?
No, it's not. It's more of a comment.
Councillor Stutchbury. Question?
Well, my question appears to have been possibly already asked and not answered. Where the writing on my screen says that 6 spaces have been removed, but the availability of parking spaces within Swift Street has been increased by 55%. I mean, is this yes, Minister, or is this Orwellian? I mean, we've reduced the number of parking spaces, but we've increased parking by 55%. I mean, is this spin? Is it yes, Minister, or is it Orwellian?
So that reference point, or?
How does reducing the number of car parking spaces increase the parking by 55%?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, by reducing the time allowed in each park increases accessibility, and that's that reference there. So it's gone from 2 hours to 1 hour, which significantly increases access for parking in that block.
Thank you, Mr Ferris. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the relevant member of staff. Is there a time frame that developers need to get back to council? I'm referring to CM 13.1 from the 16th of December, which is the 37-lot Torres Title subdivision. Discussions were held with the developer in early January 2020, and council is currently awaiting a formal response. Is there any time limit on this, or could it just go forever?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we've had further discussion, so we've received some information. We'll just finalise that and have a report to council. If not, the last meeting of this month will be in March.
Thank you. Comfortable? Okay. Councillor Thurley, did you wish to open debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Being no questions or debate, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We have the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting held on Monday, the 16th of December 2019. Thank you. Councillor Cameron.
To move that the minutes be accepted, confirmed.
Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion.
Councillor Cameron, did you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Being no question or debate, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Reports from committee forums, we have none. Notices of motion. 9.1, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that staff provide a report to councillors on the feasibility of demolishing the Albury Entertainment Centre, in brackets AEC, and constructing an entirely new building, replacing and enhancing all the current functions of the AEC. This report should investigate all possible state and federal grant funding opportunities that might be applied for.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Second that.
Question from Councillor Thurley. Councillor Stutchby, happy for me to take the question? Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The question is to Councillor Stutchby. Does your motion mean the convention wing or the entertainment part or the whole lot?
Councillor Stutchby.
I'm a little conflicted on this, Councillor Thurley. Thank you for the question. In reality, I think probably the entire thing, but certainly the convention centre, I think, is the real problem, and the other building, whose name escapes me, but I'll call it the theatre, is less of an issue. But I think it should be looked at in its entirety.
Could you wish to open debate, Councillor Stutchby?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. These two buildings, the convention centre and the other building, the theatre, are elderly. They were built in the late 60s or early 70s. They've undergone a number of renovations over the years. They're not what I would consider architecturally significant, although I have had some discussions with community members who feel that the brickwork is something perhaps worth conserving. I'm not sure about that. I'm not an expert on brickwork. But these buildings are elderly and have been renovated many times, and we're looking, when we debated the issue last year, we looked at the year before, we were looking at spending a substantial sum renovating these elderly buildings. The convention centre, I believe, is certainly not fit for purpose, and the other building, the theatre, I'm really not sure, but I think it's worth investigating. These buildings are located in what I would consider Albury's sort of premier public space, which occupies the blocks, Swift Street, Kiewa Street, Dean Street and Olive Street. They're predominantly public buildings, with a couple of exceptions, and this really should be the area of town where we focus on doing the best that we can possibly do. And a prime example of that, I believe, is Mama, which was an old but architecturally significant building, which was worthy of restoration and has been changed into something which I think is really good for Albury. And I think we could do the same with the AEC. It's not a particularly attractive building, in my view. It's really not fit for purpose, particularly the AEC, the convention centre. I think we could do a lot better. And renovating it again, you know, we did vote on this last year or the year before, and I did vote for the renovation, but I've thought some more, and I'm thinking that grant funding opportunities might have changed in the interim, and I think it's well worth re-exploring. We could build something on that location really good, really excellent, something that's worth looking at and worth going to. And furthermore, if we improve the convention centre, we might get more business there, and there may well be a business case for it. But overall, it's essentially it's a central Albury location, and I think that it could be better than it is, and I think that there might be money out there from federal and state governments that might assist us in making it a bigger and better landmark for Albury. Thank you.
Thank you. I have several questions before I take the next speaker for Councillor Clacken.
Thank you. This is actually a question I was a speaker against.
Yeah.
So
Question?
I do apologise. I thought you were saying speaker for.
No, question.
Okay. My question is with reference to the work currently being undertaken by our staff, noting that we had a report presented to us over a year ago, September 2018, When will the next report come to councillors? When is that due to come to councillors under the current schedule? And what is the next stage, if not a report?
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Councillor Glecken. So in the current financial year's budget, the council allocated $555,000 for the first phase of detailed design, which will essentially get us to development application stage. What that will allow us to do is understand the true cost of the concept of renovating the facility. That tender documentation is only just being prepared now, so the report was planned to come to council in May. Certainly if council decided to change direction, we could put that tender preparation on hold until such time as we had clarity, which I would absolutely recommend doing, because we wouldn't want to be spending resources developing that further if there was a desire from council to change direction in any way.
Councillor Vanderman, question?
My question was probably answered, but I'll ask it anyway. On the basis of the decision that this council made in September 2018, how much money has been spent so far in that detailed design stage?
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor, none to date, Councillor Vanderman. So there was 555 allocated in the budget, but that was for the tender which we were proposing to put to council for the contract for that next phase of detailed design.
Thank you. And Councillor Cameron, speaking for.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I came onto council nearly 8 years ago with an agenda of controlling the expenditure of council after I'd witnessed what I regarded as an unacceptable level of outbreaks of special rate variations over a number of years, where rates were hiked at a very sharp rate in the city. I'm proud to say that over the last 7 years and a bit, we've managed to control rate increases to the minimalist levels, and certainly to the rate cap in each of those 7 years, and I've been pleased with that. However, I'm happy to support this motion tonight because it calls for a feasibility study. It's not a commitment to do the work. It's not definite that anything will be done in terms of pulling down the centre. And I have to say, without prejudging the issue, that it would be hard for me, I suspect, to ever support tearing it down and rebuilding it completely, given what I think might be the expense and indications earlier last year of what might be the potential ballpark expenses of such an exercise. However, it's always good to have the most up-to-date information, and I'm happy to support this motion tonight in order to secure another report which will allow us to consider with more veracity what course of action we should take. Obviously, any future work along these lines would be predicated on securing very significant federal and state funding. I think we're all a little bit excited possibly at the potential for federal funding, having witnessed Senator Bridget McKenzie throw around money like a drunken sailor during the last year. But nevertheless, possibly there's some more people in the current government who are willing to be so generous. We can only hope. And to that end, I will support this motion, but I have to say that we have to be very cogent at all times to deal with the fundamental roles of council, to deal with the essential roles of council, the footpaths, sewage, water, roads. We can very easily end up with a city that is all icing and no cake if we're not careful. So ultimately this will be determined on what the ratepayers can afford and what's available, and decisions will be made on the cost, I hope. But tonight I'm happy to support getting more information. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker against, Councillor Glecken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I understand some of the concerns of Councillor Stutchbury and also other possibly other councillors around the table with the existing facilities, in that they are, or they have been there for some time. They were built in a certain period. Our community has grown and those facilities over time have been updated and enhanced to bring them along with our community. It would be interesting to see what we might build if we were to build something new, and indeed what sort of longevity that facility might provide, because I don't think that any one building ever truly meets the full needs of any community after the similar number of years that we're talking about for these two facilities. However, I'm not convinced that we need to be appearing to be throwing out or appearing to be wishing to demolish the existing facilities. And I would prefer, and I foreshadow that I would be putting up an alternative motion that I have not yet quite crafted, but I would prefer us to ask the staff that they provide us with what would be a review of all of the options, because a number of things have changed in our landscape. It's not just one or two things that have changed in the landscape in the last 14 or so months, but a number of things have changed. And so I would prefer us to do a controlled desktop review of all of the options that were presented in that report in September 2018, rather than revisit one of those options. So I would prefer us to undertake slightly more than Councillor Stutchbury is suggesting, and that is reconfirm our decision from September 2018 based on updated information brought to us by the staff, so that we can then go with confidence to the market, or indeed from that revised information we could make a new decision. I am very conscious that we make decisions as we go through time, and those decisions are made based on the best information we have at those times, and we make them wanting the best for our community. So rather than go down one tunnel, a different tunnel now, I would prefer us to have that review. And again, I suggest that I would put up an alternative motion that would not exclude this, but would include this as part of the new motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. I have a speaker for Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I applaud Councillor Stutchbury's vision on on this matter. The Albury Entertainment Centre is tired, and the time frame that Councillor Stutchbury spoke about was the early 70s. I think it was opened in 1964, the information I got from the Border Mail. So if you count that back, it was, and again, I'll prove corrected if those times are wrong, but it was probably planned in the late 50s. Now it's 2020, and its use by date is up. I'm sure the people who thought about it back in the Albury City Council in the late 50s, early 60s never envisaged it would be around 60 years later. And for all intents and purposes, you know, nothing great different about it. I also recognise that Albury has grown exponentially since those times, and as Councillor Stutchbury said, it's not fit for purpose. And I think we as a council need to start thinking a bit bigger and stop navel gazing at it's already there, can we patch it up? We don't have a great history of thinking big. You know, the airport's a prime example. It's about 4 or 5 different reincarnations, and keeps getting added onto and added onto and added onto. I wasn't around when the Larrington Sports Club idea was put up, but if I was, I would say bulldoze it down and make it residential and move it somewhere else. You know, if we want to attract big conventions, big events, concerts, all those things that are regional capital, that is out there, and we have competitors out there, the Armidales and the Tamworths and the Dubos and those sort of people. We need to think big, and my aim would be that none of the funding of it would come from any of the ratepayers. We are a regional capital. It should be federal, and if the federal people run out of money, then we go to the state, and we keep that focus on that this great idea, this great centrepiece being funded by grants and external sources. I think we've got got somewhere to go. So again, I'll be supporting this, and well done, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Councillor King. Just for a point of clarification, Mr Ferris, can you just give us some advice on the two separate buildings? We're clear on the original feasibility was done on the convention wing. I don't think the theatre was never included in that proposal. But when were they both built? I believe the theatre was in the 60s. Ms. Dwyer, do you know? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the theatre was opened in 1964 and the convention wing in 1972. So the theatre is obviously the elder of the two, albeit it's had significantly more investment in it since the two facilities were established.
So the BCR, which is the benefit cost ratio that was developed in the original report, which was above 1, was based on the convention centre in isolation.
When we did the feasibility analysis in 2017, so which was the first body of work that we did, what we did was look at the whole of the venue, considering the market opportunities in terms of the audience that we would target. It was determined as part of that audience would be between 800 and 1,000. Giving consideration to that and the condition of the theatre, the advice at that time was to focus our energy on the convention wing, recognising it is the building that requires the most investment, and that it, you know, if brought up to meet the same capacity requirements as the theatre, that we could have two complementary facilities side by side. So that study then moved to focus very much on the convention centre. We haven't done feasibility analysis on full demolition of both the theatre and the convention wing. And certainly the convention wing feasibility showed that a full demolition and rebuild would be in the order of $34 million as opposed to just under 20, which was foreshadowed. And our approach to date has been to move to the next phase of detailed design to test that capital cost estimate. And to really understand the opportunities that are presented. Certainly the benefit cost ratio on the $34 million full rebuild option was below 1, which 1 is usually the minimum requirement for attracting state and federal government money. So, you know, but certainly we can revisit those estimates to see if that circumstance has changed.
Thank you. Councillor Stubbs, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor, through you to the relevant member of staff. The only thing that I can recall regarding the theatre was a tender for the refurbishment of the stage, which was perhaps a year ago or less or more. I think that covers all of the time frames. And that tender, to my memory, failed. What is the current thoughts on the sort of structural and usefulness of structural status and usefulness of the theatre?
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor, there's certainly no indications that there are any structural challenges with the facility as it presents. It needs a new roof. That has been identified by Council in its forward budget estimates. Prior to the current Council, and I'm trying to recall the year, but it was some 6 or 7 years ago, we did attract federal government funding for a major refurbishment, and I think at the time spent in the order of $4.5 million on the internal refurbishment of that facility to bring it up to modern day standards. And that's where the bulk of that sort of renewal refurbishment was able to occur.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, Speaker against.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a quick question. Can I just preface with a question? Thank you,
Yes.
Mr Mayor. Just, and I'm happy to take on notice the money that's been spent over the last 3 to 4 years on the convention centre, including the HVAC, as well as the money spent on the theatre as part of that AEC. So I don't think that the information would be available right now, but happy to take that on notice. I just need to make a comment on Councillor Cameron's comment about our senator that was lost her position as a minister I think Councillor Cameron's only cheesed off that it wasn't the Labor Party able to throw money around like a drunken sailor.
Point of order. Councillor Cameron?
I'm not sure what Councillor Vanderven's talking about, but he's certainly not talking about the AEC proposal or the motion in front of us. And he's he's guessing. He's engaging in guesswork about what I might have thought or felt.
We'll just continue our debate on the issue, please, councillors.
So what's your ruling, Mr Mayor?
Continue.
What's your ruling on the point of order?
I'm comfortable for you to continue. I don't think it's any different to what was first stated by Councillor Cameron in his debate as well.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just wanted that clarified. The issue here for me is that I don't think that there's in any way are we able to afford to do this particular project. We've already had an estimate for 34 million. I think that was for the convention centre, not the complete entertainment centre. So we're probably looking, and again, it's a ballpark guess. We're talking, upwards of $50 million to replace both buildings. Now, whilst there might be a climate at federal and state level for infrastructure spending in local communities, by a long stretch, I don't think that the $50 million would be available. We've already had some thoughts around a particular person being honoured in that, any rework, and I think that everybody knows who that might be. But from my perspective, I think that we need to tone down our expectations or our ambitions as far as this particular notice of motion is concerned. All that I think that this will do, in my view, is delay the project that we've already identified as being worthy of budgeting $550,000 for, as far as the design of the upgrade of the convention centre to bring it into the 21st century. And I don't think we need to demolish the whole building to do that. And neither do I think we need to demolish the whole of the theatre to achieve an outcome that makes that place, which I think is it's a very comforting, warm place to view lots of different things like theatre, music, award ceremonies, those sorts of things. And I think it adequately is at the moment fit for purpose, as against Councillor Stutchbury's thoughts and Councillor King's thought that it's not fit for purpose. Both are, but we've identified that the convention centre needs an upgrade, and that's what our process should be. If this motion was to get up, I would hope that it would be done swiftly so that we can get back on track. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vanner. And question, Councillor Con?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through to Ms Squire, please. Noting that an estimate of the cost of demolishing just the convention wing was done in 2018, so what this motion is asking for in addition to that would be the feasibility of demolishing both wings. Is there an estimate of the staff time that would be required to add that piece of information?
Squire?
Through you, Mr Mayor, Councillor Con, yes, there will be a cost, there will be a resource investment required, and I would expect in terms of the feasibility of the demolition of the actual theatre building, given we haven't explored that fully, there will certainly be costs with some specialist advice we will need to seek in relation to that, but I'm happy to provide that to councillors, or perhaps look to provide you first with a report in relation to the convention wing and the information that we have already in relation to that, and come back to you with some cost indications for a feasibility for that broader body of work looking at the theatre as well. But I just don't have an appreciation of what that might be. But I would expect it could be in the order of $50,000.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Ms Squire. There are no further questions or debate. Just to finish the debate to Councillor Stutchbury, I'd just like to speak against this particular motion, primarily because being at the forefront of this council for a number of years, I've had the pleasure of escorting guests and being at many events at the Performing Arts Centre. And one such event was the welcoming of the cast and crew for the barbecue, and Shane Jacobson was here with his other cast, and they were all very complimentary of the size of that theatre, the number of seats. There aren't really any regional theatres in Australia that have 880 seats available for seating capacity, and just the nature and ambience of the venue. And I think, again, it's always great to say we could replace it with something new. I think Councillor Vanderman's being very kind at $50 million for 2 buildings. I think the original quote on the convention centre was $31 million, and an 880-seat Performing Arts Centre I would think would be every bit of $30 million again, so $30 to $40 million. So I think we've had a lot of work done on the Performing Arts Centre, and I think, again, as councillors, I think we can't throw that baby out with the bathwater, because I think, again, it is a great centre. It does a great job, and complementing that centre with an 800 or 1,000-seat convention centre would be a far more practical alternative. Alternatively, if the motion was that we review the demolition of the convention centre per se, I probably would consider supporting it. But at this point, in its entirety, I can't see any benefit. I think the Performing Arts Centre was before its time and continues to do the job bigger and better than any other regional facility in Australia. So, Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to complete the debate, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll make this mercifully short and sharp. Look, I really did want to generate some discussion over these issues. I think that we found a name for the theatre. The Mayor has called it the Performing Arts Centre. The Performing Arts Centre is probably doing its job, although it does need a new roof. One wonders what that would cost, but it's made of cream brick. You know, it's not an architectural icon, but you know, I guess it's probably okay. The convention centre, I've been there several times. It's not great. It could be better. We could attract a lot more business to this town with a better convention centre. This motion is only asking for a report. It's not asking for dynamite or gelignite or jackhammers. It's just asking for a report. This public space that I mentioned, bordered by the streets that I mentioned that I won't repeat, it's Albury's public space, and with QE2 Square in the middle of it, and it could be the jewel in the crown, so to speak. I'm just asking for a report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. On that note, I'll put the motion. Those for? Those against? The motion is lost. Councillor Glacken, did you foreshadow a motion? Did you have one to put forward? Or?
I did, however, I don't need to do so.
Thank you. Okay. We have now CM 9.2, Development of Nexus. Councillor Stutchbury, do you have a amended motion, I believe?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I would like to move that staff produce a report for councillors for the second meeting of March 2020 on the current financial situation and future financial viability of the Nexus Industrial Estate. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Con?
I'll second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, I've got a question from Councillor Thurley and Councillor Van. Are you happy to take those questions? Thank you. Councillor Thurley?
Just a procedural one. We had a notice of motion on the agenda paper, and that is totally different. Is that permissible?
Well, he has started the meeting on a rise, and essentially he's changed his motion, which I inferred when I opened the discussion that it is an amended motion, and I think he just went with that comment. So happy to accept it as the motion at this point. Did you have a Question, Councillor Vanderman?
Well, only that this particular notice of motion bears absolutely no resemblance to the original notice of motion that we were informed about.
That's my point.
Yep.
We have a motion, my question is, can we have a motion
Yeah.
on the agenda and then change it at the last minute? Or does it have to come to the next council meeting?
Yeah, well, it is a totally different motion as to the original motion. You are correct.
I'll ask the General Manager rather than Councillor Cameron.
Mr Zachnich?
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Through you, Mr Mayor. The subject of the notice of motion is unchanged as I read it, and it is open to Councillor Stutchbury to change his motion. So I think that's something that the chair's accepted it. The councillors can debate. You have a mover and a seconder at this stage.
Thank you, Mr Zachnich. Question, Councillor Vanderman.
Hypothetical question, Mr Mayor, through
Yes.
to the relevant member of staff. If this report was to be produced, if this motion was to be accepted, what cost would there be in the production of this report?
Ms Squire?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Councillor van der Ven. There would be no direct cost associated with preparing the report. It will simply provide councillors with an appreciation of the investment that we've made in the precinct to date and the current status and the forward estimates, which is all information we already have available for you, should you wish to receive it.
Thank you, Mr Squire. Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to open debate on your item? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, when I put this notice of motion in, I probably didn't put in the right wording, and so I did change the wording today, and I accept criticisms from Councillors Thurley and van der Ven about that. But I think this is definitely a better motion than the one that I put in the heat of the moment a week ago. When I did put that motion in, I didn't expect much interest, but it got into the newspaper for I'm not sure why, and I had a number of questions from ratepayers, and the two most common questions were, what is Nexus, and where is Nexus? So, yeah, I think this is one of our hidden surprises, Nexus. About a year ago, we approved an industrial subdivision in South or East Albury, depending on how you read it. And when I drove past it yesterday, half the blocks have been sold or under contract. Nexus, I understand, was commenced in 2009, 11 years ago, and we've sold one block. And it strikes me that it is just sitting there potentially draining public funds for no really good reason. And I think that it deserves a second look. You know, it was clearly looked at back in 2009 when Councillors van der Ven and Glacken were on council, and presumably they voted for it and think that it's a great thing, and it probably is, but it just seems to have got off to a particularly slow start. And I'm wondering, you know, if this was a private development, then probably the proponents would be broke by now. So how is it still going with the sale of only one block, and what is it costing the ratepayers of Albury to keep pinging away at it? And just like the previous motion, I'm just asking for a report. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. I have a question from Councillor Thurley and the speaker against. Councillor Thurley.
Question to the most relevant member of staff. Can someone update me on what the status is of take-up of industrial land in the Nexus estate, please?
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor. So we are currently, if you're talking about the stage one that the council owns, we're currently talking with 4 different parties, but we have not got a contract of sale at this point in time.
Speaker against, Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the opportunity to speak against this particular motion. I will actually probably vote for this report to be produced, seeing it's not going to cost us any money. But I just want to speak against this on the basis of the comments that Councillor Stutchbury has made, that this was a very clear vision for the future for Albury to make sure that any future heavy or large-scale industrial development in Albury was well out of the Albury CBD and residential areas. The stumbling block so far to any contracts having been signed has been the issue around the connectivity between that area and the rest of New South Wales and Albury, and that has been the Davey Road interchange, which is now an absolute certainty to go ahead. On that basis, I think that we are, as Ms Squire was saying, negotiating with 4 people around take-up of stage 1, and after that, obviously, the private partners in this particular project would be looking to move on their investment in this particular precinct on the basis of the fact that they have significant money at stake as well. So from the perspective of trying to put the other side of the story to this Nexus development, I think it was a very far-sighted move on council's behalf at that time to start this particular process. Yes, it's always one of those things. Council were criticised for starting Airport Park, and look at the success that's been. So we just need to give these projects time, because they absolutely will provide Albury with an industrial precinct, jobs, and more jobs in that particular precinct. We've already had that proven around the jobs creation with the stuff that was hidden and eventually cajoled out of the New South Wales government about the job creation, about the viability of the whole project. So we know that it's going to work. It just takes time, and we just need to hold the course on this. So just wanted to put that side of the whole precinct on the table for councillors to make a decision about this particular motion.
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Vanderman. Speaker 4 is Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would have voted against the original motion that Councillor Stutchbury had foreshadowed, but I will vote for this. It's giving us an updated report on what's happening out there. These things take time. The only reason I live in Albury was because of the Albury-Wodonga Development Corporation, and they attracted Australian newsprint mills to spend several $100 million and build a factory that went for 40 years and employed in the order of 200 to 300 people. It didn't happen in 5 minutes, and I don't believe that Nexus will. But it's a site for light industrial and something. The only regional cities in Australia that are surviving are those with manufacturing. Those that rely on agriculture are struggling big time. Those who have manufacturing are doing well, and we need to attract more investment here in manufacturing. We've lost Norske Skog. That's a symptom of the world market for printed media, but we need to get smaller industrial, and Nexus is the place for them. I agree with Councillor Vanderman that the Davey Road interchange is a critical part of getting people there. Obviously, the rail hub and the Edinburgh rail hub are critical matters also. This won't happen quickly, but we need to stay the course on this one, and we need to promote it and promote it and promote it. It's a great opportunity for industrial development in Albury.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. We have a speaker against. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, through you. I, like Councillor Van der Ved, whilst I say I'm speaking against, I will likely vote for this, again, because we will be doing a desktop, for want of a better term, really undertaking a desktop review of the current status and potential viability of Nexus. Yes, Nexus was commenced some years ago. The Edamoga Rail Hub, one of the major reasons they located there was because of this future space. It's not the only, but it was one of the significant reasons they located there. And it has taken considerable time to deal with the earthworks, the water, the sewer, power, roads, curb and guttering. All of that infrastructure has taken a number of years for us as one of the developers to be able to put in there. It's not something you can build when you're a council dealing with the ongoing daily routine of an entire city. It's not something you can do overnight. We have been waiting some significant number of years for the Diamond interchange, the full Diamond interchange, and that is on now, finally, on the plans. And the other significant factor is also the gas supply. So whilst it has been somewhat frustrating, I appreciate why Nexus is at the stage it is now, and I appreciate all of the considerable work that has gone into that from a number of different quarters. And I also acknowledge the faith that business and industry have in that precinct being successful in the medium term. It's no longer going to be the very long term, it's going to be the medium term. And so whilst I will possibly vote for this, I still need to decide, I do not agree with the original sentiment of the motion and would not entertain the possibility of, as was suggested in the original motion that was in the agenda. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Speaker 4, Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I'm voting for Councillor Stutchbury's motion. I think it's about time that Nexus received a rocket under it, and we got a full, comprehensive, detailed report on what it's cost so far, what it's likely it's going to cost. From what I understand, the gas is not on, the power's not on, the water's not on, and we're trying to sell this to prospective, investors. So this should not turn out to be a Masters versus Bunnings type of exercise. So in 3 or 4 years' time, we keep throwing money at it, and it hasn't been worthwhile. So look forward to this comprehensive, detailed cost-benefit analysis report on Nexus. Thank you.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Vanneman.
Thank you. Councillor King's speaking eloquently for the motion raises a couple of issues for me. Can I get an update perhaps on where we are with all of the infrastructure that Councillor King has said that's not available or in place? Can we talk about power, sewer, NBN, and water? Yeah.
Ms Squire? Gas? Power? NBN?
Through you, Mr
Water.
Mayor. Electricity supply is to the precinct. Water and sewer, water supply is to the precinct, as is the internal supply system. Sewer is, as resolved by council, the tender for that has been awarded. Works are scheduled to be completed in July, and that relates to the augmentation of the actual network, not the internal connections. NBN, we have a contract in place with NBN. They have done all of the preliminary works they are willing to do until such time as the first tenant lodges a development application. So they won't actually do any further work to provide infrastructure connectivity until that development application is lodged. Gas supply, you will receive a report on the 24th of February in relation to gas supply and the mains extension agreement from APA. And certainly, I think I've covered all of those things off, Mr Mayor, but I'm happy to be asked any further questions if I haven't.
Yes, you may.
Indicates that Councillor King's reasons for supporting this are not required.
Ms Squire?
I don't think I need to comment on that, Councillor Vanderven.
Councillor King, do you have a question?
I have a question. So electricity to the precinct, can you tell me what that means?
Ms Squire?
So into the precinct, there's capacity for 6 MVA supply. To the 9 lots, which we're currently working through, we're actually looking to subdivide those into 12, and there are connection points. So once we know what tenants' specific requirements are, they can then connect into that supply network. So there is 6 MVA available, and every single tenant will have different electricity demands. So, you know, they may have specific substation requirements that will be required on their lots, but they are not generally, they're not ever put in place until such time as the tenant's demand is known. And that's at the cost of the tenant, if I might add.
So the power is to the node, I suppose, yes. Okay. And the sewer's not on? What's happening?
Yeah. Sewer works are underway at the moment. They're in construction.
And the gas is where? We're getting a report for 2023 or something, is it?
As mentioned, Mr Mayor, we have and will present to Council a report in relation to the mains gas extension agreement that is required that we enter into with APA with regard to the gas supply connection, and they're forecasting those works would be completed by January 2021, which is in line with what we specified to the state government in our funding deed.
Thank you, Ms Squire. Councillor Con, Speaker 4.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wasn't intending to speak to this. I support the motion. It sounds like it's a fairly simple provision of information to councillors and hopefully the public as well that will be valuable to all of us. I just wanted to speak briefly to address some of the comments that were made by a couple of councillors in passing that were just based on information that's quite substantially out of date. Based on the 2016 census, manufacturing was the 4th largest employing industry across Albury and Wodonga. It's only employing 10.5% of residents at this stage after healthcare and social assistance, public administration and safety and retail. So I don't think that affects the outcome of the motion today, but hoping that our comments can be in 2020 and not 10 years out of date.
It's a night for corrections. Thank you, Councillor Con. There are no further questions or debate. I just would like to further add, being that Councillor Stutchbury's intention with these two motions was to create conversation, debate, you succeeded admirably, I might add. But like my predecessor and successor and my predecessor, Councillor Vanderven and Councillor Glacken, the three of us have worked tirelessly with the staff on this particular project from its genesis to now. And I feel like, Ms Squire, I could write the report, as probably do Councillor Vanderven and Councillor Glacken. This was a very ambitious but very needed project, and with all the stars being aligned now with the funding for the Davey Road interchange, the gas gate, and of course the funding for the Edamoga hub, I think all augurs well for that particular precinct. Given only a few months ago the DSI site, which is 4 hectares, was sold to Melbourne investors, I think there is legitimate and keen interest in Albury Wodonga for manufacturing and other businesses. And I do believe that, yes, a report is required, and I look forward to the update. But I just think that we'd hasten to throw that baby out with the bath. Tonight we seem to be wanting to throw that baby out of the bath. And I really think that Nexus is the future for manufacturing in Albury-Wodonga, as Logic is to Wodonga, Nexus is to Albury. The work has been done. I look forward to the report to understand the complete detail, but I also acknowledge the work that Councillor Vandeven and Councillor Glacken and the staff have done in the past to bring it to this point it is at. And I also hasten that Stage 2, which is owned by AP Delaney's, is a private-public partnership that Council has encouraged, and again is an exciting opportunity. So, Ms Squire, I look forward to the report, and I hand over to Councillor Stutchbury now for close.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to all the councillors for participating in the conversation, which is what I really wanted to happen. Look, I guess in closing, I'm hoping that we'll get a positive result for my notice and a report, and I think Nexus, it probably is a great idea, and it'll be fantastic if it was successful. My object in doing this was to, as Councillor King I think said, set off a firecracker under it, just get it moving. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We have no presentation of deputations, no reports of minutes of committees and working parties. We have CM12 documents for sealing. Councillor Vandeven.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council authorises the seal to be affixed to the documents outlined below in the presence of two signatories authorised to affix the seal pursuant to Regulation 400 of the Local Government General Regulation 2005 and the Council seal and management of legal documents and advice procedure. A. Albury City lease to Thurgoona Community Centre Incorporated, Kosciuszko Road, for 3 years commencing 1 July 2019, FIL 12/00747. And B. Albury City lease to Orana Community Centre Incorporated, Lamington Springdale Heights Community Centre, for 3 years commencing 1 July 2019, FIL 12/00739.
Thank you, Councillor Vandeven. Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vandeven, did you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
No further questions or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Officer reports for consideration. CM 13.1 development application 10.2019.36710.1 125 Kerr Road, Thurgoona. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, to move the recommendation as a motion is printed in the agenda. That Council A, receive and note the contents of the report, and B, grant consent to development application 10.2019.36710.1 for 92 lot subdivision of 125 Kerr Road, Thurgoona, subject to the conditions contained in the draft development consent that is included in report as included in this report as attachment 4. Thank you.
Thank you. Seconder, please. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glack, do you wish to open debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report has come to us or a version of this report has come to us previously. Further information was sought and negotiations were undertaken with the developer. This is in a precinct or a suburb that is growing rapidly and will continue to grow and develop. This development is an important part of the future of that suburb, Thurgoona, that will one day apparently become a city in its own right, or may become a city in its own right. It will at least reach the size, physical size of a city. There have been a number of concerns raised by councillors pertaining to this development, but I believe, having read the report and the previous report, that this is the best way forward for us as a city to enable this development to proceed, and I believe that it meets the requirements of our planning to enable it to do so. So I believe we should be supporting this tonight. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Speaker against, Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I am speaking against this motion. Thurgoona is going to become a city in its own right, but at this rate it's going to become one that doesn't have its own town square, like we have the benefit of QE2 Square in Albury, without its own botanic gardens and potentially without any public space. This development application in almost identical form came to council as previously. A number of us opposed that application for various reasons, but the one that a majority of councillors agreed on was the lack of provision of public open space to the future community that's going to live here. The objectives of our LEP clearly state in Clause 1.2 that we require a high level of social and physical amenity and a diversity of activities and uses. This is a 92-lot subdivision. It is not insubstantial, and it's not providing that diversity of activities and uses. It's my personal view that the developer hasn't engaged in those negotiations that we requested in good faith. I think that the demands that they've since made of council, in my view, are unreasonable. Other than the open space, my additional reason for opposing the application today is that it's going to put stormwater infrastructure into land that's zoned for environmental protection. Albury City's biodiversity legislation means that we allow substantial amounts of vegetation clearing on land that's zoned for residential use on the proviso that we maintain and improve biodiversity outcomes on land zoned E3, but we're constantly faced with requests for consent for various types of infrastructure, roads, etc. in E3 land, and at the moment we are not measuring at all whether we are meeting that objective or maintaining and improving biodiversity on our E3 land, and until we do that I can't support any further applications that are going to affect that E3 land. I'm deeply concerned that this is death by 1,000 cuts to land that we've made a commitment to protect. Thanks.
Thank you. We have speaker for and against, but I have a question from Councillor Cameron. Councillor Cameron?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the most appropriate member of staff. Does this development application, is it compliant with the DCP for Thurgoona?
Mr Christie?
Thank you for the question. For you, Mr Mayor. In regards to the Thurgoona-Willinga Precinct Structure Plan, it does comply with the provisions of that. There is a provision for a local recreation park to be provided at a later stage in this area, but there's not one in the Thurgoona-Willinga Precinct Structure Plan in this stage of the development.
Yeah.
Is either or both the Willinga-Thurgoona Precinct Structure Plan currently being reviewed, or the DCP currently being reviewed, and if so, what is the status of those reviews?
Mr Christie?
Again, thank you for the question for you, Mr Mayor. In regards to the DCP, I'll take that component first, which is part 10 of our DCP related to residential development. That was out for exhibition late last year. We're currently going through the submissions that were received, and at this stage is planned to provide a report to Council in March in regards to whether they adopt those provisions as exhibited with some changes. In regards to the Thurgoona-Willinga Precinct Structure Plan, at this stage there's a draft budget item which is looking at putting that review of that to occur in 2021 in regards to review of the structure plan.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, speaker 4.
Reluctantly, Mr Mayor, it seems to me from my reading of the report that the developer is on strong legal grounds, and as is usual with this particular planning consultant, the responses he gives contain what I would think are fairly strong comments about councillors. He suggests a lack of appreciation of the real-world consequences of their actions. I would invite him to sit here and make these decisions. They're not easy, but in this case it does seem to me that he's complied with all the requirements. I note from Councillor Cameron's question, and I have great sympathy for it, if he complies I think we've got the rules wrong, because we need to make it tougher. We were asking him to look at some public open space, and what did he do? He offered us 4 lots at a cost of $200,000. Well, if that's what he was offering, then what he's costing his profit at is $4.64 million, and he couldn't offer us $200,000 discount. I have big problems with this development. I wouldn't want to live there. The smallest block is 404 square metres. The largest is 540 square metres. These are small blocks and no public open space, and that's the problem I've got, that there needs to be public open space. If you've got 92 lots, eventually it's going to be some young families, eventually there's going to be a lot of kids, and they need public open space. The people themselves need public open space so they're not stuck in their houses on hot summer nights. They can get out and talk to their neighbours. But sadly, I've looked at and read it and read it and read it. He complies, it seems to me, with the requirements. And so the choice I have, and he's made it quite clear in his letter to us, that his next stop will be the Land and Environment Court. Sometimes you take that on, and sometimes it's prudent to look and say, I don't think that's a wise move. And sadly, that's where I'm at tonight, so I will have to support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Speaker against, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Thurley, for speaking against the motion but suggesting that you'll vote for it. I think that what you said was entirely appropriate. This is not a good development, and I also wouldn't want to live there and wouldn't want to bring children up there. It's 92 lots with no public open space. If all DAs relied upon for safe passage through council was to comply with the DCP, then you wouldn't need councillors. You just have the staff say, yep, it complies, whack it through. The reason we're here is to say, hang on, this might be legally compliant, but I don't like it. And I don't like this development. I really don't like it. And I don't like the feeling that the developer has not engaged with council as we requested when the DA was deferred last year. We've had an aggressive and unpleasant letter from the planning consultant with threats of legal action, and my personal feeling is that we should stand firm and we should say, no, we want some green space in this 92 lot development, and the DCP is wrong and the DCP will be changed, but for this particular development, no, we are standing our ground and requesting green space. You know, Albury is going to go on for a hell of a lot longer than this particular council and these particular councillors, but we as a group are going to be responsible for some of what is, some of which goes into the future, which includes pretty ordinary looking multi-storey developments and large residential lots without any green space. It's not good enough. I don't like this development. I don't care if it complies with the DCP. I don't care if the developer and his aggressive planning consultant is threatening Land and Environment Court. I think we should stick to our guns and say, no, this development, which is going to be full of families and small kids in the near future, needs some public open space, some green space. At the present moment, the nearest public open space to this development is across Tabletop Road, a busy road, and about 1.5 kilometres away, or without crossing the road but trekking 3 kilometres there and 3 kilometres back, or I don't know the exact distance, it could be less, to another estate. That's not going to happen. I mean, people need the green space near them, near their houses, near their families. And I am very upset at the way this DA has come straight back at us with with nothing. In fact, they've got more demands on us. So I would like to foreshadow, should this motion fail, another motion. I do not think that we should accept this. This is not good enough. It's not good enough for Albury now. It's not good enough for Albury into the future. Now's our chance to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Speaker 4, Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We've had some fairly strong sentiments expressed tonight, and I have to say that I have to point out that councillors have a statutory responsibility to deal with development planning matters according to the legislation, according to the regulations, and according to accepted codes of practice and standards of behaviour. It is not viable or desirable for councillors to vote with their heart and not their head on development matters, or certainly any part of their anatomy lower down than their heart. It is, it's not acceptable to, because you don't like something, if it complies and if it is sound from a legal point of view, to try and effectively ransom additional modifications to your taste from the developer and the developer's consultant. The developers, of course, are people with families too. The developers are people who have invested their capital and often borrowed heavily to subsidise these projects. And these projects, whether you want to live there or not, provide living space, and their construction and development provides employment, significant employment in this city. And we need living space in this city. Now, having said all that, I too am sympathetic to the view that I would like to see more green space in this particular development. But as I said earlier, it is not an appropriate way to behave as councillors to ransom or attempt to ransom and hold to ransom each person who makes, or each group of people that make a development application in our city, and say to them, oh, your development application, it ticks all the boxes. It fits the DCP, it fits the Willinga Thurgoona, help me out, plan. Thank you. Precinct structure plan. But hey, I don't think there's enough playgrounds and I don't think there's enough green space. And that may well be the case in each person, depending on what each person thinks is in the subjective view of what is enough. Therefore, I'm going to delay or further reject your development plan until you agree to comply with what I want, even though it's in addition to the statutory and legal requirements that councillors have developed. If there's not, ultimately, if there's not enough green space and playgrounds and so forth in these kind of development applications, particularly at Thurgoona, to councillors around this council chamber's taste, then it's on their heads. It's on our heads. It's not on the heads of the developers, or even if they employ consultants who might write letters that we don't like. That's not their fault, because it is our fault. We are the ones who develop and approve the DCP. We are the ones who develop and ultimately approve all of these types of planning legislation. And if those types of controls and council policies do not contain what the majority of councillors around this chamber think are adequate provisions for things like parks and things like green spaces, then that's on us. It's not on the people who apply and invest their capital and go to try and create these projects to make money and to provide employment and living space in this city. So, in my view, we are duty bound to vote for this motion. And it would be a parlous state of affairs if we ever get to a situation in this chamber or at any type of government situation where people say, I don't care what's legal, I just don't like it and I'm not going to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Speaker 4, Councillor Vanderman. No speakers against.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll make it brief. I think Councillor Cameron for once has hit the nail on the head. That was sotto voce. The issue for me is that this council has a litany of development applications over the last 16 years that I've been involved with, where our hands have been tied and we've tried to get the developer to modify their development at our request. And if they haven't chosen to make any modifications and their development is within the laws, then there's not much we can do. I, for one, would not be prepared to spend $1 trying to justify a no vote through the Land and Development Court, or the Land and Environment Court, sorry. So the only thing here is we can approve this development, and I think under a lot of these sort of circumstances, I think we just need to let the market, play its part in this development. And if people look at it and say, oh, there's 92 residences here, but there's no open space, I don't want to buy here, well, so be it. And I think that that's where we need to leave it. And hopefully we get, this will go through and won't cost us, council, any money to refuse this development. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. We've completed our movers and seconders. Where we're up to a close. Councillor Stutchbury, did you open this one, or Councillor Cameron? Councillor Glacken, here we are.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. To close debate.
Yes.
And thank you, councillors, for the discussion points as raised. I won't take issue with all of the suggestions raised by some of the speakers for speaking against this motion. I will, however, in a very positive way, wrap up the discussion. It is not up to us and our own personal preferences as to whether or not we would like to live here or not, or whether we'd like to buy here or not, or whether we'd like to own something here or not. We, as all, decide where we would like to live within a number of factors, including cost, but also personal preferences. So there are some people who want to live on lifestyle blocks, and there are other people who want to live in inner city living, and some people who want to live in houses, and others who want to live in apartments. So whether or not these blocks sell or don't sell is not up to us. It's up to whether or not the development is attractive enough to the people who are out in the market wishing to purchase property. I'm very conscious of the fact that I often say or refer to one person's castle may not necessarily, or alluding to the fact that someone's castle may not be in the eyes of their neighbour, the castle. This person owns this land and has lots of reason as to why they want to do this development, the 92 lot subdivision, and they have lots of reasons to be able to do it in the way they want to do it, part of which is that they meet our requirements. So therefore, on the basis of it meeting our requirements, on the basis that this suburb is growing and will continue to grow, and that people are wanting to buy these lots, I believe we should be supporting this development. And I conclude with it has my support because it meets our requirements, and that land and those houses will be built very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. I'll now put the motion in division. Those for the motion: Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mack, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Fairley, Councillor Vandervan. Those against: Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Connor, Councillor King. Yeah, I did. That's what I'm doing. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. The motion is carried. Okay, Councillor Stutchbury, we have the next item is the Thaguna Drive and Elizabeth Mitchell Drive intersection contract number 19/03634. Councillor Stutchbury, your light is on.
I'll just wait for Councillor King and his outrageous
his
conflict of interest departure to occur.
Thank you.
He cannot hear a word of this.
The door is slowly closing. Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wish to move an alternate motion that Council accept neither tender for this item.
And your reasons for that motion? We need reasons why. Well, then it becomes just a blanket motion without any purpose. What's your logic?
Because the traffic light's not necessary for that intersection.
Okay. Yes, seconded. Councillor Cameron. Are you happy to second that motion, Councillor Cameron?
I'll second it, Mr Mayor, for the purposes of allowing discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to open debate on that
Thank you,
motion?
Mr Mayor. I'm sorry to do this to you again, but no one wants these traffic lights out in Thurgoona. These traffic lights are not needed for that particular intersection, which only reaches minimum standards of failure twice a day on school days, where for 20 minutes or so people are held up, which is very similar to what happens at many other intersections in Albury.
Yes, Councillor Thurley, point of order.
Councillor Stutchbury seems to be debating whether traffic lights are required. This is simply a motion about who gets to construct a roundabout, and I believe those comments are totally out of line. We have decided what the design of this roundabout will be in conjunction with Roads and Maritime New South Wales.
So I believe it's traffic lights, not a roundabout, but
Roundabout, sorry.
Councillor Stutchbury, could you confine your debate to the purpose of why we shouldn't be letting the tender?
Because, as I said in my original version of the amendment, that we should just accept deny the tender, as I'm not allowed to debate the necessity of traffic lights or not.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, you wish to speak against that motion?
Yes, please. I'd like to speak against the motion, most recently, the alternative motion put forward by Councillor Stutchbury and seconded by Councillor Cameron, that we not accept the tenders. And I foreshadow an alternative motion should this motion not get up, and that alternative motion would be to revert to the recommendation as in our agenda.
Thank you.
I speak against this, Mr Mayor and councillors, because we have dealt with this already. We've dealt with this more than once. It is a situation where the RMS are supportive of the design that we have. We are looking at this tender because that is what we have agreed. We have it very clearly spelt out in the report that this is for not only at the moment, but also the longer term. We are very aware that the suburb of Thurgoona continues to grow and develop, and we're also very conscious of the fact that the internal highway, having taken its course, now means that there is some areas of increased traffic use within our community. One of those areas is this roundabout. So I cannot support this alternative motion as has been brought to us just in this meeting by Councillor Stutchbury and Councillor Cameron. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor, no speakers for, but I have a speaker against. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, the Thurgoona community is desperately waiting for us to upgrade this intersection. We've had a really thorough and substantive debate about what form that upgrade should take, and it's unfair to them to now delay this further at a stage where the contract's ready to go ahead. I would support the original motion. Thanks.
Thank you. No further speakers. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to close your short debate?
I'm not really sure what I'm allowed to say, Mr Mayor. Clearly I'm not allowed to mention traffic lights or roundabouts or anything of that matter because Councillor Thurley doesn't wish me to. So,
well, the ruling is that it's not part of the debate. What is part of the debate is whether we should accept the tender for the design.
We should not
for the
accept the
works.
tender for the design for the works.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is lost. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to move the original motion as was in the agenda, that Council accept the tender from XL Grey Brunei Proprietary Limited for contract number 19/03634 Elizabeth Mitchell Drive and Thurgoona Drive intersection reconstruction in the lump sum amount of $346,000.
No, 3 million.
Where am I? Oh, I do apologise. There's those extra numbers. $3,406,101.05, including GST.
No problem. Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Just have a question from Councillor Vanderman and Councillor Glacken. Can we take the question? Councillor Vanderman, question?
Just a quick question, two actually, Mr
Yep.
Mayor. One concerns the design of the roundabout and connectivity to Thurgoona Drive in both west and easterly directions. Yeah, roughly. Is there going to be the potential to increase the number of lanes across the Thurgoona Road overpass to 2 with this current design? That's the first question. Second question, was there any concern from council staff about the quite large differential between the two tenders, 1.2 million, which in this case is in excess of nearly 35% of the recommended tenderer?
Thank you. Mr Ferris.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor. So the east-westerly direction, there's provisions through the intersection to duplicate, so there's 2 lanes in each direction. That then will drop back to a single lane as it moves up to the freeway, as per it does now. We'll continue to work with RMS around the upgrade of that intersection and potential to make additional lanes on that intersection and then bring it down. But at this stage, the scope of this work is as per the attachment, which moves back from the intersection a significant way to allow some storage in both directions.
Thank you. That's one.
Yes, the second one, the tender.
And so the tender received was in accordance with our estimates. So we didn't have any real concerns. We did an analysis of our estimates versus what was there. There was a significant difference between the 2 tenderers. We also looked at that. We also looked at the capacity of XL Grey Brunei to undertake the works, given that they've been awarded 2 large projects in recent times, and the panel were comfortable that they had the capacity and the resources to undertake that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Gluckin, do you wish to open debate?
I'm very happy to am I opening or am I closing?
Well, you're opening at this point.
This is the new one.
Yeah,
Okay,
this is
I
the
do
new one.
apologise. Thank you very much. It's becoming rather confusing. And I must apologise, were it only that it was going to cost 340.
Yeah, I wish it was.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. However, it is significantly more. I wish to support this determination of the tender here this evening, because the community of Thurgoona and indeed our wider community has been waiting for this work to be undertaken for some time, and they've been waiting for it because they need it. Not only do they need it, but we've been communicating with them for some considerable months. We've undergone significant community consultation a number of times, pertaining with a particular reference to this roundabout. The roundabout and work associated with it, its redevelopment, will increase the ability of people to access, not only now, but well into the future as well. It is required, and I'm very happy to support the determination that the tender be awarded to XL Grey Brunei. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I think there's no further speakers for or against, so did you wish to close debate?
Consider it closed, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Thank you, Councillor. We get Councillor King back in. Thank you, Mr Christie. Excellent. Thank you. Let the records show that Councillor King has returned to the chamber. We are now up to 13.3, the South Albury Levy Upgrade Detailed Design Contract number 19/05249. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that council accepts the tender from Price Merit Consulting Proprietary Limited for contract number 19/05249, South Albury levy upgrade, detailed design for the lump sum amount of $208,010, including GST.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Van Der Wijn, to open debate.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll reserve my right.
Thank you. There's no questions or debate, so Councillor Van Der Wijn, do you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Excellent. I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 13.4, Community Participation Plan, having your say on planning matters. Councillors? Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, to move the recommendation as a motion that council receive and note the submissions, adopt the Community Participation Plan, having your say on planning matters and subsequent amendment to Albury Development Control Plan 2010, and C, undertake those actions required under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979 and Environmental Planning and Assessment Regulation 2000 to commence these provisions. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. A seconder, thanks. Councillor Van Der Wijn.
Yeah, happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin, do you wish to speak to that?
Mr Mayor, it's inviting to be able to discuss this. I won't go into great detail. However, suffice to say, it is good that we have had significant feedback on this plan, which is very important. It shows that our community does wish to participate in this, and that I note that a lot of these suggestions have been taken on board, amendments have been made, and it's good to have the community participating. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, on that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We have 13.5, which is the concept designs for the Ivor International Museum of Flight. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wish to move an alternate motion to that showing on the board. And I have
Yes.
provided that to our secretariat.
Yes, if we could get that up on the board, that'd be fantastic.
So my motion is that council proceed with the Ivor International Museum Flight Feasibility Study as per the resolution of council. So, instruct Peddlethorpe to complete the project in accordance with the resolution of council at its meeting of the 26th of August 2019, and B, prioritise a review of the Cultural Precinct Master Plan 2020-21, concurrent with the Albury and Lavington CBD Master Plan review, such review to include immediate discussions with the Diocese of Wangaratta and Bellbridge Hague with respect to any plans, concepts or ideas related to properties owned by those parties.
Thank you. We have a seconder, Councillor Gluckin.
Yes, I believe I am happy to second this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to open debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Council in last year agreed that we would ask Peddlethorpe to conduct a brief feasibility study at a cost of $15,000. It was to investigate one of three options that the original UMCT report flagged as possible sites for an Ivor museum. They flagged three sites, one at the airport, one at the railway precinct and one somewhere in or around QE2 Square. While not saying that what the UMCT desire is a bad thing, and I don't wish in any way to say that their proposal for a museum at the hangar at the airport is wrong, this was simply to gain further information. But what's also come about since then, and let me go back one, Peddlethorpe's report says, it is clear the community and stakeholders do not support the proposal, but that was on the basis of some very limited meetings. And I would agree that those meetings clearly did not support this proposal. But that was not a community-wide survey, and I believe that we should continue with this proposal to get the detail. I've added the second part of this review because we had a presentation here which Bellbridge Hague, the Diocese of Wangaratta and a firm of architects called Fender Castellides looked at the QE2 Square and what was possible and what could be done. If we're going to review this plan and we get this report from Peddlethorpe, we need to get our act together quickly, because we know that the Diocese of Wangaratta and Bellbridge Hague are separately looking at proposals and ideas for their properties and the precinct. If we wish to have the best outcome for QE2 Square, and I'd have to say it's the last public space in Albury that can be preserved, and I'd also say it's one of the few public spaces in a regional city, and we're fortunate to have it. If we want it to stay a prime part of our community, then we need to be actively involved. And while the Peddlethorpe report is simply looking at one small component of that, we need at the same time to look at the master plan. And I've put that last sentence up there because I think it's a matter of some urgency. We know that there are people considering developments in that precinct. And if we don't get in first and negotiate and be part of those discussions, then we'll be faced with a DA in here one night that we may not like. And I'd like to be upfront and involved. I don't have any problem with the UMCTs. In fact, I congratulate them on the work they're doing. And there is no doubt that the initial, at least, hangar will be the museum at the beginning. Whether it stays that way forever is an entirely different matter, and I would like to have this option at least fully explored so we understand what we could or couldn't do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Speaker against, Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking against this motion. Obviously, the IVA's an incredibly important story in Albury's history, and it deserves to be commemorated. And the previous proposal was to put the replica IVA plane, once restored, near the airport, which is something that I would support. However, I regret not being present at the meeting when this study was originally commissioned, and if I had been, I would have spoken against this proposal outright at the time, and that's for one simple reason, that this proposal is threatening to subsume the Retro Lane Cafe, which is a tremendous asset for our young people. I hear from them all the time that they appreciate not just the cafe, but that this is a space for free Friday night gigs for budding musicians, that they can do art classes, and that it's a safe social space for young people who are otherwise marginalised. When I've travelled to Wodonga for events like the Rainbow Ball or to the Alpine Valleys to speak to young leaders, they express envy of Albury City's facilities for young people in this space, and I cannot support any proposal that would threaten the Retro Cafe. Subsuming it to become a cafe within a museum would completely destroy its original intent and purpose. Furthermore, we've proposed to pay $15,000 to a consultant who've made the surprising move of coming back to us early to tell us that the community feedback is so bad that they don't want to continue the project and they don't want to take our money. To me, that's truly remarkable. And I quote that as per the consultation meetings within the document being the interim report, it's clear the community and stakeholders do not support the proposal for an IVA museum building in QE2 Square. There could be negative impact on existing community connections if the project is built. I suggest those negative community connections are going to be with our young people who we've built a fantastic relationship with, including their Retro Lane Management Committee that's made up of young people mostly under the age of 18. I think it's remarkable to get such strong feedback at such an early stage. It's very clear what the community thinks, and this project should not go ahead. If this motion is lost, I foreshadow that I will be moving the original motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker for a question from Councillor Gluckin. Thank you, Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, my question to the most relevant member of staff is with reference to the raising of the Retro Cafe. I know it is in the report, but Councillor Con has referred to it as, I suppose, not so much in the words of, but along the lines of its demise. And I wanted to check if the Retro Cafe space was considered at some stage, at any stage, to be taken, and the facility, the cafe facility provided within the subsequent or consequent building Would the emphasis remain to be a cafe, as is the purpose now, for the primary use and reason of its existence being for the youth of our community, such that they could continue to have their bands and they could continue to have their own space, as opposed to a cafe that was attached to another museum?
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor, thanks for the question, Councillor Glacken. It's probably important to refer back to the original council resolution, which is the brief that the consultants have been given. And that really does allow them the opportunity to consider, the Retro Lane Cafe as part of the planned area. But it doesn't dictate what it might look like. And, at this point, they've come up, they've done their urban site analysis, they've done some consultation, but they have not yet come back to us with options as to what that might look like. So I just think it would be premature of me to try and answer your question when that really would be something that may come out of the final body of work that they do as to what it actually looks like.
Okay, over Speaker 4, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Had Councillor Thurley not amended this motion in the way that he has, then I certainly would have. The report needs to be completed, and it's my view that it's overreach from staff to recommend that we not proceed with the report. Councillor Con suggested that there's been overwhelming community feedback that this potential museum near the QE2 Square has overwhelming community support. Well, that in fact is not what has been displayed to us in this report. An internationally renowned architect from a renowned firm was invited to Albury to conduct an investigation and produce a report on the possibility of the IVA potentially being part of a QE2 Square location. And he was faced with a council staff meeting where he received a fairly negative response to the possibility. He then met with Bellbridge Hague and the Diocese of Wangaratta, and we have little or no information on those meetings. And then he met with the supposed key stakeholder group, which was not a key stakeholder group. It was a group of people who were not interested in further exploring the possibility of the IVA Museum possibly at some stage in the future potentially occupying a QE2 Square location. So, in fact, this particular architect, I feel, was treated quite poorly, and I'm embarrassed by the way he was treated, and it was not overwhelming community support. Councillor Con, it was negative comments from staff and negative comments from a supposed key stakeholder group, which was not a key stakeholder group. So, getting back to business, QE2 Square is a magnificent part of Albury, and we've already discussed it tonight in relation to the AEC and the Performing Arts Centre and the Convention Centre, and we have the opportunity now, soon, but possibly lost in the not too far distant future, to make this a magnificent public space which is wholly or almost wholly publicly owned. And it may or may not involve an IVA museum. Who knows? We haven't received the report, and staff have recommended that we not go ahead with the report, and that's not good enough. The report was requested by Council last year, and the report will be received by Council when this architect completes his investigations. If the QE2 Square is not an ideal location for the IVA Museum, so be it. But in regard to the second item, which is the master plan, there is not much point doing a master plan which involves property which is not owned or controlled by Council. There is no point in us doing a magnificent QE2 Square master plan, which involves the Bellbridge Hague building and perhaps part of the Diocese of Wangaratta property, if we don't own it or control it, and if they have already put in their own DAs for development. So, this all needs to be sorted out now before Bellbridge Hague finalise their plans and before the Diocese of Wangaratta formalise their plans. This is our opportunity to make that entire space virtually 100% public owned and to improve it. And personally, I myself am not in favour of the Retro Cafe disappearing. I think it actually is a good spot. I've been there, I've enjoyed myself, and if there was some way that this could be done preserving the Retro Lane Cafe, that's great. But we'll never find that out if we don't get the report. So, Councillor Thurley is quite right. We should instruct Peddlethorpe to complete their project. I also think we should apologise to them, and specifically to the architect who was treated so, well, he was not, he didn't receive an overwhelmingly positive welcome to the city, I'm ashamed to say. So I encourage us all to vote for Councillor Thurley's amendment, complete the report, and let's see what we can do with this fantastic public open space. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Just one question about your debating point, Councillor Stutchbury. Where does it come into the discussion that he was not overwhelmingly welcome to Albury? I mean, what's the context of that item? Were you present when this was?
I was not present. I've merely read the report and listened to a few people who were present. His first meeting was with council staff. I'm not sure why. This I don't know how the opinions of council staff on the final location of an IV museum is relevant to this particular architect giving us some of his ideas as to how an IVA International Museum of Flight might be presented in QE2 Square. And, you know, I didn't want to go into forensic detail about the key stakeholder group, but
Well, I'm just asking whether or not the architect was or has ever said he wasn't welcome to the city. Is this just a presumption, or?
It's a presumption, and I think that if you read between the lines in the interim report, I think you can see that his reception in this city in regards to this report was overwhelmingly negative. Otherwise, why would he choose to abandon providing the report and stop halfway through?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Councillor Cameron speaking for the motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My focus, as I indicated earlier on another matter this morning, has always been what is affordable for the ratepayers of the city. It would be an ambitious plan to see a Museum of Flight or an IVA focus centre in the Civic Centre, or QE2 Square, or whatever we're calling it now. Nevertheless, one thing I learnt in the army is that time spent in reconnaissance is never wasted, and we have already substantially commenced on the course of action to get a report on the possibilities here. We're not committing ourselves to carrying out any predestined plan, but it is just common sense, and not to mention the prerogative of this council, to call for reports and expect to see them completed, not to have them intentionally or unintentionally undermined. And I was very surprised to see a recommendation recommending that we abandon the process. I feel the need to address some of the hyperbole coming from Councillor Con tonight, to say that, or to claim that the majority of people of the city, or words to that effect, are not in favour of this potential project, and that's all it can be, is potential at this juncture, is simply that, hyperbole. There has been a very small cross-sample of opinion taken, and the report is not even written yet. The second thing I want to address is her lauding of the youth cafe, and it is certainly a good facility, but you would think that it was engraved in stone in this city, that it was locked in there and it had always been there, or there was some historic merit in it or something. Before this term of council, in fact, and during the last term of council, it was in Dean Street. and had been in Dean Street for many years. And it was moved to a new and much better facility where it now resides. But who knows what the future might bring. But if we don't get the report, if we don't get the information, we can't make informed judgments about what is the appropriate way forward. Now, this dream, and it is a dream at this stage, that the restored Iva might one day reside in the Civic Centre or QE2 Square or whatever it's called, is just that. But we need to get this report finalised so that we have more information. With the appropriate level of funding, all things are possible if there's the will of the city and the amount of money is affordable. But there are other stakeholders here, of course. There is the representatives of one of the newer forms of Christianity who own significant property in that area, and there is private ownership, Belbrig Hage, for example, and others. So, there's a lot of moving parts to this, which is a further argument for getting the report finished and not throwing it in the bin. To throw it out now would be premature and silly. We all probably have our own preferences. I think it's a bit early to speak, and I haven't fully formed what mine is for the future of that area. I'd certainly like it renamed.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Naming it after a member of the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. So some person who is a foreign monarch, in my view, of predominantly German descent, is just bizarre in this day and age. But anyway, I'm sure I could come up with any number of suitable alternative names, which I won't bore you with now. So, let's get the report finished. It's already started. Let's have a look and let's proceed cautiously and carefully, because this is the ratepayers' money we are talking about, and there are other property holders in that area who have to be taken into consideration were we to do anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker for, Councillor Vanderman. No speakers against.
Briefly, Mr Mayor, I take note of all of the comments that have been made. I do take umbrage at Councillor Con's presentation of the Retro Cafe as being totally subsumed. That's not ever going to be the case, and this anything to suggest that it is just fanciful. I would like to focus on the second part of the item B, which is, in my view, the critical part of this particular motion, and that is the immediate discussions with the Diocese of Wangaratta and Belbrig Hage regarding any plans, concepts or ideas relating to properties. I was very excited with the presentations made by those parties and the architects that they had spoken to around what might be possible in an area. And I think that's in my view, critical part of this particular motion. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. There being no speakers for or against, I just want to clarify part of the report which has been raised on several occasions by Councillor Stutchbury about the reception given to Peddlethorpe. In the consultation meeting 4, there's a mention of a Albury City Councillor. I'm sure that was me. And was it you and me? I was there, wasn't I? I was somewhere in one of those consultations, but either way, I can validate that they were warmly welcomed, and essentially the consultation was done with the people that attended. Yes, Councillor Cameron.
I think this whole line of questioning is slightly labouring at cross purposes. I believe, and I'm sure he would confirm it, that when Councillor Stutchbury spoke of him not being warmly received, he was in fact referring to the fact that the gentleman was given a impression that the concept was not warmly received, not he personally or his work being denigrated in any way.
So you're the interpreter now?
I'm just trying to assist, Mr Mayor.
So is that correct, Councillor Stutchbury?
I'm always here to help.
Excellent, thank you. And whilst not labouring on the point, I do think the report is partly finished, and I do support this alternative motion on the basis that the report should be finished. We should include all options available to us, and I think, again, we should support this motion. Councillor Thurley, did you wish to close debate?
No, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Finally, we're through that one. Officers' reports for noting. We have the investment balances. Councillor Vanderman.
I'll move the recommendation as the motion that the council receive and note the investment balances report for the month of December 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Vanderman, did you have anything to raise from that report?
No, just to note, quickly note a slight increase in our investment balances and a slight increase in our investments by non-fossil fuel type. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 14.2, pecuniary interest disclosure returns register. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that council receive and note the first pecuniary interest returns of staff and Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee members recently appointed to designated persons member positions since 1st July 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron.
Second.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, just to speak to that.
Just to remind anyone present that if they wish to look at it, it's lying on the table.
Thank you. No further questions or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 14.3, Councillors' Conference attendance, 1 July 2019 to 31 December 2019. Councillor Vandervan.
Mr Mayor, I'll move that a recommendation of the motion the council receive and note the report on councillor attendance at conference for the period 1 July 2019 to 31 December 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Vandervan, do you wish to open debate on that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, do you wish to speak to that motion?
Tempted, Mr Mayor, but I won't. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. It's 14.4, OLG Code of Conduct Complaints Report. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receive and note the Albury City Code of Conduct Complaints Report, Data Collection 2018-19, and B, note the report has been submitted to the Office of Local Government in accordance with Part 12 of the Procedures for the Administration of the Model Code of Conduct for Local Councils in New South Wales.
Thank you. Second is Councillor Vandervan.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that report?
Lovely to see that we only spent $267 on complaints.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 14.5, Monthly Development Statistics, December 2019. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vandervan.
Happy to move the motion that council receive and note the information in the monthly development statistics report for November and December 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Vandervan, do you wish to speak to that?
Just to note that we still seem to be going okay in that dealing with a lot of development applications.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 14.6, Two Cities, One Community Action Plan. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive and note the Two Cities, One Community Action Plan report.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak to that?
Just to briefly note that there seems to be some very positive things happening in that space, and I look forward to some of them coming to positive outcomes.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM15, there are no delegates' reports for notice. Haven't been made of any notice of urgent business. Councillors, anyone with any urgent business? Councillor Thurley.
And I was moving on to the next item.
Okay.
Premature.
Confidential matters. Councillor Thurley.
I move the council move into confidential to discuss items CM 17.1 and CM 17.2, as these are confidential items exclusive of press or public on the grounds that the matters relate to the matters and information are the following: personnel matters concerning particular individuals other than councillors, Local Government Act 1993, number 30, section 10A2A.
Thank you. Councillor Glycan.
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Just, are there anyone in the gallery that wishes to make any contributions to why this matter should not be going into confidential? Please raise your hand. There are none. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. And Mr. Zachnis. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried.
Don't bother, we'll just be coming out.
He didn't actually read out the names, did he, or not?
Thank you, councillors. Back into open council. I need to recommit the business from the confidential discussion. And the first item was the CEO performance plan that council endorsed, the 2019-2020 CEO performance agreement. It was moved by Councillor Cameron and seconded by Councillor Thurley.
Yep.
And the matter was carried. The second item was 17.2, which was the Council A receive and note the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee update report, and B appoint Carolyn Rosetta Walsh to Albury City's Audit Risk and Improvement Committee in accordance with the Charter. Moved by Councillor Thurley and seconded by Councillor Vandervan and carried by Council. It's been brought to my attention that we need to recommit item 13.4 because it raises questions in relation to the Development Control Plan. So in relation to that item, it was the have your say or the planning item in relation to community participation plan. Could we have a recommission of the vote as a division? All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Gleichen, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vandervan. The motion is carried and that completes tonight's business. Thank you, councillors.